Start recording. Okay. So at this point, right, I've kind of done some decent sculpting on the body. You could always do some more. But keep in mind that you can actually apply all of these fundamental things that we've been doing to the other objects, right? So if I go to 4 for object mode, right, that puts us into object mode. I could turn my biped gear back on, right? Remember, we have kind of our outliner up here. I turn the visibility off and on because of the eyeballs. And I could select the gear. Now, if I want, I could turn the eyeball off for this gear. In fact, remember, there is actually a quick key, Shift-I, that actually is Isolate Select, which is kind of cool. It's up to you on if you want to use Shift-I for Isolate Select or if you just want to kind of turn the eyeballs off in outliner. But I just figured, hey, if I do it a little bit, show you a little more today on how to set up the sculpting process again for, like, say, the gear, and I show you a couple of stroke types, it gives you a little bit more tools that are part of your arsenal, right? So remember, you select your object. Make sure you're using the sculpting workspace, right? If you're UV editing workspace. We want to go to our properties menus here, blue wrench, right? Blue wrench, because that's where our modifiers are at, right? We have that add modifier menu up here. So I can left click on that, and I can go to multi-resolution, right? So it's one of our modifiers, just like if we added mirror or subdivision surface modifier. But it's called multi-resolution, right? Because it allows us to subdivide and have multiple levels of subdivision active that we can go up and down non-destructively. So I'm going to apply a multi-resolution modifier to the gear. And then, of course, we can hit subdivide, right? Because that'll give us more geometry. So we subdivide this a couple times. I figure we'll stick with 3 for the moment and just see what it gets us. But remember, there is that subdivide button right there, right? That's kind of one of the key things to having your multi-resolution modifier work properly. You can apply it, but if you don't subdivide it, then you've applied it for no reason, right? If it's still at 0 level, right? See these levels? If it's still at 0, then you're not doing anything with it. You don't actually need it, right? The whole point of applying multi-resolution modifiers is so that you could subdivide, right? So you get some levels. Now, at this point, remember, yesterday's quiz, of course, was Sculpt Mode, right? And that's 5. But remember, the mode's right up here, right? Usually you'll see it's Object Mode right here. But if you click on that, remember, we have Edit Mode, Object Mode. We've done quizzes on that a bunch of times. But there is a Sculpt Mode, which is 5, right? 5. Now, if, in this case, you see I've kind of got these green things, that's because the face sets is on. That's kind of the little kind of overlapping circles, right? You have a kind of a white circle and kind of like an empty circle overlapping like a Venn diagram. If you click on the little V next to it, you could turn face sets off, right? Face sets are kind of like a saved selection that you could do stuff with on sculpting. It can be pretty cool, but I'm not really going to show you guys on this stuff, right? There's only so much we could do in any one, project and stuff like that. So face sets off. Also, this is where if you want, you could check statistics on so that you can see your polygon count, right? So you can have an idea of your polygon counts. Now, once you hit 5 for Sculpt Mode, you'll see your Sculpt tools come up, right? You'll also see up here now we have some extra options that are available. In particular, you'll see the kind of the butterfly that looks like it's kind of bisected, like it's kind of like got a line going down the center. And you'll see X, Y, Z, your axes. This gives you symmetry for really any kind of manipulation, right? Move, rotate, scale, tweak, sculpting tools. It doesn't give you extrusions, multi-cuts, bridges, that kind of stuff you really do need a mirror modifier for. But if you're just changing shape either through sculpting or even just like the more standard move, rotate, scale, tweak tools, you can actually use these to have it affect both sides. So there is actually symmetry functionality that's not full mirror in Blender, but is still darn useful, particularly for sculpting. And you see when I turn that on, you see how I actually have a brush on both sides, so I can get symmetry sculpting, right? So I figured it'd be cool to kind of do this video for you guys, this little lecture, a bit shorter one, but it still allows me to show you guys the setup process a second time for sculpting, right? Now remember, you do want your model to be done, you want your UV unwrapping to be done. That's always kind of, particularly for how we're doing it, best a practice approach, so that way you sculpt and then you just bake your normal map down. Now at this point, you can actually do some cool sculpting in here, and I just kind of like kind of 2 things I wanted to show you guys today. One is masking, right? One of our brushes over here, if we scroll down, is kind of a brush that looks like kind of a paint brush, kind of painting like a white stroke on like gray. It's kind of way down here. So remember, you can scroll down. There's like a little scroll bar on the side. You can use your scroll wheel as well. It'll be way down here past the yellow brush ones. It's kind of towards the bottom, right? But you see it's kind of the white and gray brush, right? It's this one right here. You see it's kind of a couple below cloth. If you click on that, that's masking, right? And what masking allows you to do is you can just left-click drag. Remember, left and right bracket keys will make your brush size bigger or smaller. I can just left-click drag. Now, in this case, my brush looks like it's painting not terribly bright. Your mask has a strength, so you can turn that up to 1 if you want to. Remember, your strength control is always up here for your brushes. And you see how I can just kind of go in here and just paint a little bit of a mask. So what masking is you can actually paint an area of the model that you're either going to use a mesh filter on, or you're going to sculpt around. Masking basically means wherever you paint this kind of dark gray blackish color, you won't be able to sculpt there, right? So you can actually go in here and paint a mask. Control will paint it out, so you see how Control inverses, right? So I can just kind of paint a little bit of a mask if I want to, just left-click drag. So it works just like our normal sculpting tools, right? It's a brush, you turn it on, you left mouse button. Control will inverse it, you'll be able to get rid of the mask. Shift can actually soften it, right? So Shift kind of does a similar thing here as well. It kind of smooths it. Now, if I go to a regular sculpting tool, like I go back up to, say, my draw shape, you'll notice when I sculpt, you see how it doesn't sculpt the masked part? So that's what's really cool about masking, is you can kind of paint an area you don't want to affect, right? That's what masking does. Basically, wherever you paint a mask, you can't affect that area. You can't sculpt it. You can't do stuff to it. However, you will see that there is menus up here when you're in sculpt mode, right? 5, mask, right? If you go to mask area, see you can actually invert the mask. Control I. Now, just the part that I actually did want to do stuff to is not masked, right? So oftentimes, particularly if you just want to work on an area that's a lot smaller than the rest of it, it makes a lot more sense to paint the mask and then invert it, right? Because you're just painting a little bit. But now you'll see that the opposite is true, right? I can sculpt here, and it won't affect anywhere else on the model. Now, if you take that and you add it to another brush, so I'll scroll down below masking, right? So the mask one's right here. It's kind of that ball with a brush, and it's kind of looks like it's got like a white streak across it. It's grayish. If you scroll down further, there is one called mesh filter. It looks like a ball with a square and kind of a blue blob tentacle trying to escape, right? Way down here towards the bottom. Also, if you just hover your cursor over them, it'll say mesh filter, right? So if I click on that, what's cool about this is actually something you can apply to the whole mesh. It's got some options. If you go up here to, say, Inflate, you could smooth, you could add some erase displacement, enhance details, sharpen, smooth out areas. I like Inflate, so I just have Inflate on. And what's cool about Inflate is it's kind of like, it's like extrude along normal direction, except it doesn't extrude, it just moves. But it moves all of the non-masked areas out along normal direction. So if I just left-click drag anywhere, you see how it kind of moves those polygons that aren't masked out along their normal directions. This can be a really cool way to add kind of like engraving details and things like that to armor and gear, right? So masking is kind of cool, right? So that one right there, you paint your mask. If you need to, you can inverse the mask. There's a mask menu up here. You can clear the mask, you can invert it, right? And then there's even mesh filter, and this actually can apply to the whole mesh, right? It would inflate the whole thing. Usually you do some masking so that you're affecting just a section, right? But the mesh filter with Inflate in particular is really, really awesome at doing this. So that's one of the things I want to show you guys today was how you can mask. It's pretty easy. And how you can use mesh filter Inflate to do things like this. Now, Control A is the quick key for clear mask, right? But it is in the mask menu. Control A, clear mask. One last thing I want to show you, because like I said, I didn't want this video to go this lecture to go too long, is what if I wanted to kind of put some nice little ridging here, kind of in between my little armor. And you could do this anywhere, right? It could be anywhere on this model, but I've got a shoulder pad, so I might as well show it off there. Now in this case, I could use crease if I wanted it to be more subtle. I could use draw sharp if I wanted to be harsher. I think I'm going to use draw sharp. I'm probably going to turn the strength all the way up to 1, right? So remember, draw sharp brush up here. I haven't really talked about this yet, but we have the brush menu here, right? And you can turn on like hardness there to make it harder. And I'm going to do some more stuff with that when we come back next week, right? Kind of as a one last hurrah when we have longer classes. Textures, you can add textures to it. I'll show you a little bit of that as well. But I wanted to show you at least one of the stroke functions today. We'll see a little more of these things on Monday next week. But you see how when we have a brush on, we have our strength up here, but we also, and our radius. So if you can't remember left and right bracket or S left mouse button, right? And it's S, and then actually it's not even left mouse button, it's just S, and then move your cursor, right? Move your mouse. Those are brush sizes, right? You do actually have an actual slider right here for radius, the size of the brush. But if you keep going further over, you see there's lots of other options here. The third one is called stroke. I can left click on that. By default, it's set to space, and that's a good default a lot of the time, right? If you're expecting your brushes to behave like they do default, it's usually space. Space is a good default, and it's usually the default on these brushes. However, that very top option of the stroke menu is stroke method, right? It says space. It's a little kind of pull down menu. If I click on it, there's other options. We're going to see drag dot to do kind of rivet details. In fact, I might even do that today. It's easy enough. We can use anchored, which do some neat stuff. And I'm going to use show line. So there's actually some cool strokes in here. So I'm going to switch to line. And now you'll see what I could do is if I left click drag, you see how it drags out a line? So if I hold down left mouse button and I move it out, it does a perfect line. So that's really, really neat if you're looking to get that kind of straight edge. Just switch your stroke to line method, left click drag, and it draws this line out, and then you can let go, and it does this thing. So you've got these really, really awesome stroke methods that allow you to do some really neat, cool stuff. Like I said, Blender actually has some pretty strong texturing and sculpting tools, right? There's a lot to really love, right? So line stroke really allowed us to easily kind of make this nice little ridging in there. And these strokes can be used with any brush, right? So these are always available for all your brush presets here. Now, if I wanted to, I could, of course, go back to stroke and switch stroke method back to space. I'm going to go back to drag, the regular default drag. I want the strength to be a little higher. I'm going to go to brush menu, right? And I'm going to turn hardness up a little bit. That'll make the edge of the brush harder instead of softer, so it'll kind of do a sharper shape, right? If I have hardness set to 0, and then I go to, say, stroke, there's another stroke type called drag dot. Drag dot, right? And what drag dot allows us to do when we turn that on, so if I just left click drag, you see how it drags a dot? In this case, I'm going to make my strength a little higher for this. Maybe make my brush a little bigger. See how we just hold down the left mouse button and move, and it just drags this dot shape. So this is how we can easily do rivets on something, right? Now you see how it was kind of soft rivet, though? That's where if you go to brush and you turn up hardness, and then, of course, the stroke menu here, I set drag dot. Now you see how they're harder? Now, I've only got my sculpt level at 3. You guys might need to do, it depends on if your machine can handle it. I'm going to subdivide it one more time, because I know my station can handle it. But it depends on if your machines can handle it or not, right? And you see when I've got more resolution there, when I go up to level 4, these rivets look way better. So sometimes if you go to put something in and it doesn't look that sharp, you might need another subdivision level. But you see how drag dot, just on the regular draw brush, stroke, drag dot, and then brush, hardness, totally has allowed us to kind of do some cool rivet detailing on this gear. So this is kind of this idea of showing you guys that masking can be really cool and that you can actually play with strokes and even some brush options to do some really, really neat stuff, even with the default brushes that are here. So there's lots of really cool details and detailing that you could do just with these default brushes. A couple more in there. There we go. That should be good. So remember, we've got these strokes, right? The stroke menu here, the stroke method. Space is a good default, but drag, dot, and line can do some really neat stuff. Remember, there is a brush menu here as well. They're all up here. Hardness can do some cool things like make that harder edged. And we even saw things like the mask brush down here. You just left-click drag to paint the mask. A mask menu where you can invert and clear the mask. There's quick keys for those, though. And we can even scroll down further to kind of this one right here for mesh filter. And what that does is that just basically gives you a lot more to work with in terms of neat things you could do to add details. All right, I think that'll be a great place to stop.